Hello and welcome to my channel, Designer of Learning. My name is Grace and I'm about to begin my 5th year teaching 2nd grade. In today's video, I'm going to share with you all of my back to school plans. In my district, we always start school on a Thursday, which gives us 2 short days to introduce our students to our classroom, procedures, and to create strong connections. This short week is really helpful in kind of easing both the students and the teachers back into the routine of school. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step of the slides that I use in my classroom, the activities that we engage in, as well as the procedures I think are most important to establish from the very beginning. If these things are interesting to you, then please keep watching. If you find this video to be helpful, please like it so that others can have an opportunity to see this video for themselves, and also subscribe if you want to see more videos coming from this channel in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and let's get started. So I'm going to begin by walking you through all of my slides for our very first day of school, which is Thursday. All of the slides that you see are either a combination of my back to school slides or my daily and weekly schedule slides in the rainbow themed. And then I'm also going to talk about other things throughout this video, like my morning meeting slides and my joke of the day slides. So all of these products will be in the description for you below. So to begin on Thursday, I like to have a visual way of walking my students through the steps that they should take as soon as they walk into my classroom. This year, we're letting parents walk down students to their classroom, and so this is really helpful in guiding the parents and the students to know what to do. So the first thing I want my students to do is to put their backpack in their locker. And if they brought a lunchbox, they will also put it above the locker. Then they'll find their desk, and hopefully they've come to meet the teacher on Tuesday of this week. And so they'll be able to find their desk easily. And then the last thing they do is they start coloring this Welcome to 2nd Grade coloring page that I will have ready for them on their desk. This is a great activity for me because it helps a student be actively engaged in an activity that doesn't require me to answer a lot of questions, which leaves me free to greet students at the door, to answer questions that any parents or students might have for me, and it helps them have a really easy way of settling into our classroom routine because coloring can feel safe and easy, and as they're coloring, they start naturally starting conversations with their table mates, and it's fun to see them already begin to establish relationships just as they're coloring their page first thing in the morning. I also like to have this happy first day of 2nd grade slide ready behind my welcome page with the steps for the students. That's because I have found that a couple of parents like to take pictures with their child's teacher and their child on that first day of school. And I like to have this as a background option if a parent asks for a photo because it looks really nice and it helps remind them that this was the first day of their child's 2nd grade. And so if a parent asks for a picture, I sometimes switch my slides to reveal this slide. That way it just looks really good in photos. So that's a really small little hint that I do in my classroom. Once all my students are settled and they've said goodbye to their parents, I immediately want to introduce them to how I will get their attention when we're in the midst of activities and learning. So I have classroom callback slides that I use throughout the school year with my students, and I often change my callback to keep it fresh and new. But those first few days, I stick to the same callback so that they feel very familiar with it. So I will tell my students as they're coloring, they're usually having small conversations but are still being very quiet. And so it's pretty easy to tell them like, "Good morning, class. I'm so excited that you are in my class this year. And as we're doing fun activities and creating new learning this year, I need a way to be able to get your attention so you can hear new directions and instruction." And so that will look like me saying to you, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. And then you as a class will say 1, 2, eyes on you. And I talk with them about how I don't want them to just call back 1, 2, eyes on me, but then continue to work and have their eyes and their attention on their project. When we're doing a callback, it's so that I can get all of their attention, so that their eyes will turn to me and their hands will stop what they're doing so they can listen for directions. Then I tell my students, we're going to practice our callback. So I show them this slide again and say, so I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. You'll say 1, 2, eyes on you. So I show them this question, what's your favorite dessert? And I tell them, I want you to turn and talk with the people at your table and ask them what their favorite dessert is and then listen for their answer. But if you hear me say 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, what will you say? And the class will say 1, 2, eyes on you. And I'll celebrate their great job. And then I'll say, okay, now turn and ask your neighbor, what's their favorite dessert? So the classroom will get a little bit louder as students start chatting with their neighbor. And then once I've heard a lot of students answering this question and good discussion, then I show this slide again and I say 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. And then I want students to turn their eyes to me and say 1, 2, eyes on you. So I celebrate the great job that they did. And I said, okay, let's do it again. Let's practice some more. And so I will have them turn and talk with their neighbor and ask their neighbor, what's your favorite movie? And we'll do that same thing. They'll have a discussion. And then when I feel like it's time, I'll show them this slide and I'll say 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. 1, 2, eyes on you. And this is such a great activity to establish right away because I want to be able to safely and easily get my students' attention. And so by reinforcing this particular callback, it'll help my students solidify their response when the time comes. And so if I can have their attention first thing, the first day of school, this will help lay a foundation for the rest of the procedures, routines, and activities that I will do today and the rest of the school year. And then before I begin our morning meeting, I inevitably have a student or multiple students who need to use the restroom. And so I want to introduce them to the routine of asking to use a restroom. So in my class, we use something called silent signals, which is where they use different hand signals to show what they need, and then I'll have either a response of a thumbs up, which is yes, a thumbs down, which is no, or then I'll sometimes kind of wave my hand, and that means wait, because sometimes if they're asking to use a restroom and we're a minute away from wrapping up our phonics lesson, I might say wait, because I think they can hold it for just a minute. But sometimes if it's an emergency, we know to let our students go. And so I will tell them if they need to use the restroom, the hand signal looks like 2 fingers crossed over each other, and they practice that, and then they practice seeing my responses. And that way, when we come together at the carpet for morning meeting, when there's going to be a lot of sitting and talking, they know how to safely ask me to use a restroom. And because my students are second graders, so many of them already know where the restroom is, but I still go over where to find the restroom in our school. That way they can safely walk there on their own. Then I tell my students that every morning we have the opportunity of getting to know one another better through a morning meeting. And I like to signal that our morning meeting is about to begin through a song. And so I play the same song all year long, and that is their cue to know it's time to clean up and to come to morning meeting. And so again, I want to model and practice this routine. So I play the song for them, and I tell them when they hear that music, it's time for them to come. We talk about how they need to put their papers in, where they put their papers, they need to push in their chair. I ask one student to model that for us, and we celebrate, oh, great job. Then I'll call in another student and I'll ask them, would you model it for us? And so one by one, I'll have the students come to the carpet while the music is playing, practicing all my expectations as I come to morning meeting. Then for morning meeting, we do a greeting called the teacher greeting. And I know that so many of my students feel a little bit shy and intimidated to talk the first day of school. And so the teacher greeting is really just about me having an opportunity to practice saying my students' names. So in the teacher greeting, my students get in a circle, and all it is I'm simply pointing to a student and I'll say, "Will you please say your name for Miss Mack?" And they'll say their name. And if they said Sarah, then I just say, "Good morning, Sarah. I'm so glad you're here." And then the student next to Sarah, I'd say, "Would you say your name for Miss Mack?" And they'd say, "Ryan." And I'd say, "Good morning, Ryan. I'm so glad you're here." And so this is a way for me to reinforce knowing my students' names and putting their face and their name together. And so really it's a great practice for you as a teacher to be able to remember students' names, but it's a really low threatening activity for my students because all they have to do is say their name, and then I'm warmly greeting them and saying, "Oh, I'm so glad you're in our class," and then to the next student. And so this teacher greeting is a great way for students to start to hear their classmates' names, and then for me to really practice saying their names. It's also a good chance for them to once again say their name and the pronunciation of their name, and for me to make sure that I'm getting that right on the very first day of school. Then with the structure of our morning meeting, we always have a greeting and then we have a sharing time. And later on in the school year, I have popsicle sticks that have each of the students' names on them, and I'll pull out one popsicle stick and that person gets to share for the day. But as we're starting, very first of the school year, I want to have something that's really concrete for the students to answer. And so I'm asking the question, what is your favorite animal? As we go around the circle, students get to say their favorite animal. And so some students will be really shy and they might just say a dog. And other students might already show that they love to talk. And so they might tell you that their favorite animal is a cat, and it's because they have a cat, and go into a story. So you have to kind of watch to see for the ones that are really eager to share a lot to make sure that everyone has a chance to share. But a lot of students just find a lot of confidence in saying what their favorite animal is because, again, it's something that most students can easily come to mind with their favorite animal. Then after the sharing, we always have an activity, and later on in the school year, these activities are more correlated to our standards. But in the beginning, a lot of our activities are just for fun because it's also important that students really see school as being a place that is safe and welcoming. And especially for students that struggle in school, it's nice for them to do an activity that isn't about how good they are in math or how well they're reading, but just an activity that lets them be a child and be one with their peers because they're all just having fun together. And so I do think that having games, especially at the beginning of the year, are so important for helping students see school as being a place that they want to be. So when we play A Warm Wind Blows, the way this works is I'll say a phrase. And so I'll say, "A warm wind blows over everyone in our class who likes pizza." And the students are to stand up if that statement is true for them. So if they like pizza, they just stand up. They don't make a noise. They just quietly stand. Once they stand up, then I signal for them to sit back down. Then I'll say another statement. "A warm wind blows over any students in our class who play a musical instrument." And if that's true for a student, they stand up. So we do that just with several different statements, and it's a fun way for students to start to see that there are students in their class that have the same interests and the same hobbies as them. Then after activity, we have a morning message. And with the morning message, I first read it to my students and then we read it together as a class. So our morning message for the first day of school says, "Good morning, happy first day of second grade. I am so glad that you are in my class this year. I can't wait to see all of the ways that we are going to grow and learn together. Love, Miss Mack." And then I signal to my students and say, "We're going to read it together." And so I say it nice and loud. That way, if I have students that struggle with reading, they can just kind of copy what I'm saying. But we all do it together, and it's really good for them to start reinforcing, hearing the words. And then I have a pointer, so I point to each word at a time, which is really great for students to start to make those connections if they haven't become strong readers in first grade. Then After our morning meeting, I want to talk about myself because for students, they don't know a lot about me, and I want to give them an opportunity to see the ways that they have connections with their teacher. And so we play a little game where I have students make a guess about when they think my birthday is. And so I'll show this slide on my board, and I have this slide available on Teachers Pay Teacher, and there's a little yellow square. And if you drag that yellow square over to the answer that matches what's correct for you, then when you click the next slide, it'll actually reveal that yellow square. So I have my students guess, when do you think Miss Mac's birthday is? And I call on any friends that want to raise their hand to share. And then I click that next slide and it reveals, oh, Miss Mac was born in March. And so some students get really excited because they were born in March and they already see those connections. Then I ask my students, what do you think is my favorite color? They make their guesses and I reveal my answer. We do the same thing for what my favorite food is, my favorite drink, my favorite dessert, what I like to do for fun. On this one, I put more than one thing. So I talked about how I like to read books, I like to go on bike rides, I like watching movies and shows, I enjoy talking with friends, I like creating things, and I really like to go for hikes. Then I have them guess what my dream vacation would be. I talk about how I really like the beach and the sound of the waves and how relaxing it is. And then I show my students pictures of my family, and I talk about how important my family is to me and how special they are. And then I share about some of my favorite things. I talk about how I love to travel, I love to read books, and I love being a teacher. Then I tell my students that very soon they are going to have a chance to share about themselves. I'm going to tell them that they're each going to get their very own bag to fill with 5 items that tell more about themselves. And so I have students start thinking, what are 5 things you would want to put in your bag to explain about you? And so I tell them I would want to put a picture of my family in my bag. And I would talk about maybe I would want to put a souvenir from one of my travels, and I explain what a souvenir is. And so my students begin to think about what they would want to share with their classmates. And that's been a lot of sitting already. And I can tell even in that short time that my students probably start to get restless. And so we talk about how when we do have a chance to listen to our classmates share their all about me bags, we want to make sure that we're being super respectful listeners. And so we talk about how respectful listeners make sure that their eyes are always on the speaker, that their ears are listening, their voice is turned off, their hands are still, and their body is sitting still. And then I tell my students that we're going to play a little game because anytime that I want my students to do these things, to have their eyes on me, to be listening, to have their voice turned off, their hands still, and their body still, I call that a self-check. And so sometimes when we're in our lesson, I'll just gently say, oh, would you do a self-check for me? And that will remind the student that they need to have their eyes on me and their body needs to be still. And so I tell my students, we're going to play a game where we're going to see pictures of boys and girls, and we're going to look and see, are they showing a self-check? In this picture, does it look like that person has their eyes that are on the speaker? Do they look like they're listening? Is their voice turned off? Are their hands still? Is their body still? And if they think that the picture shows someone having a self-check, they should give me a big thumbs up. But if they think the picture shows someone not having a self-check, they'll do a thumbs down. So we look at the first picture and we say, does it look like he is having a self-check? And they show me with their hands. And then we'll talk about, oh yes, it does look like he's having a self-check. And I'll call on students and say, why do you think that they had a self-check? And for the kids that want to share, they excitedly will tell me, oh, he's sitting still, his eyes are looking forward. Then we'll look at another picture. Does it look like she's having a self-check? So we go through all of these different pictures, and they'll talk to me about why they think the students are or are not showing me a really good self-check. And once we finish this activity, then I read my students a story, First Day Jitters. Because even after we've gotten to have a chance to have an activity and sharing, students are still nervous. There's a lot of new things that happen in a school year. And especially this time teaching, I have students that maybe haven't been in school for a while because of COVID. And so I want to make my students feel safe and welcomed. And so we read this story, First Day Jitters. And in this story, the surprise ending of the story is that the whole time you're hearing about someone who has nervous energy about the first day of school, you're thinking it's a student, but you find out it's actually the teacher who has first day jitters. And I remind my students, it's okay to be nervous, because sometimes we can be nervous about things that we're really excited about, but new things can often be really nerve-wracking, but that doesn't mean that they're not good things. And so I say, I kind of still have some first day jitters, and I want to see if I can get rid of those first day jitters. So will you help me? And so I tell my students, we're going to do different things to try to get rid of our first day jitters. And so I have my students get up and stomp away their jitters, and then we clap away our jitters, and then we jump away our jitters, and then we dance away our jitters, and then we walk away our jitters, and we stretch away our jitters, and then we do a squat to see if we can get rid of our jitters, and then we laugh away our jitters. And this is a really fun one because I tell my students, like, let's do fake silly laughs, but then the fake laughter turns into real laughter because it's just so contagious. And then I tell my students to hug themselves, to hug away the jitters, and then to pat away the jitters. And then finally I tell them we get to sip away our jitters. And so I buy some orange soda and I just give them just a little bit because I don't need a lot of sugar early in the morning. So I just give them a little bit of jitter juice and they get to sip away their jitters. And while they are sipping away their jitters, I let them talk at their desks and let them kind of get to know each other. And then once everybody has their jitter juice, I will again reinforce that callback and I'll say 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. The students will say 1, 2, eyes on you. And I'll tell my students, we are going to get to do a fun math activity where we graph how many students liked jitter juice and how many students did not. I tell my students, as I call on you, if you don't want to share your answer, you could just say, I'd like to pass Miss Mack. So I tell my students, you don't have to share if you don't want to. So then I'll call on each student one-on-one and I'll say, Sarah, did you like jitter juice? And each student will have this page in front of them, but I will also have it projected onto my smartboard with my document camera. And so if Sarah says, yes, I like jitter juice, then I'll have her out, and our whole class will get out an orange marker and we will mark in the one box that one student liked jitter juice. And then I'll keep going around the circle and I'll say, Ryan, did you like jitter juice? And he will say yes or no. And then once we've graphed it all together, then we'll write tally marks for how many students liked jitter juice and tally marks for how many students did not like jitter juice. And remember, this is all whole group because I know that we're modeling these things, hoping to reinforce skills that they've been acquainted with in first grade. And then we do an addition sequence. So how many students like jitter juice, how many did not like jitter juice, and then the total. And saying like that total is the number of students in our class. And I like to have slides that show my students what we are doing and then what they will need. I'm a very visual learner, and I always think that this helps reinforce for my students direction following when they can see it and not just hear it. Then once we've done that activity, I have my students open up their red folder, which they've brought to Meet the Teacher night. And when they leave Meet the Teacher, I put in each of their folders their picture dictionaries. And I tell my students that for a couple of minutes, they just get to color in their picture dictionaries, that these are going to be resources for them to use all year long. And so I want them to reference them over and over again. And so I just give them some time to work on their picture dictionaries and to talk to one another. And this helps kind of me regroup and lay out the next supplies I need for our next activity. It also helps me check time to see, did things take longer than anticipated? Were they shorter than anticipated? And helps me to feel ready for the next things moving forward. And so it's nice to have some activities that are very independent for your students, because that first day is a lot of you talking and a lot of reinforcing and modeling procedures. And that takes a lot of energy. And so I like to have some things that students can do independently with high success. After a while of them working in their picture dictionaries, we reinforce that callback. And we are getting close to lunch at this point in our day. And so I tell my students that we are going to practice marshmallow walking. And a lot of students then ask, like, what is marshmallow walking? And I talk about how if you drop a marshmallow on a table, it doesn't really make a noise because it's so soft. And we want to walk like that in our hallways. And so when we walk in the halls, we want to be like marshmallows. We want to have our voice off. We want to walk in a straight line. And we want our feet to be so quiet. And then I model for my students that we're going to line up at the door in ABC order by last name. And so I will call each of my students one by one in the order that I want. And I have them get in line, and I have them look to the person in front of them and the person behind them and say, like, these are people that you will be in line with for the next couple of weeks. And so these are your line buddies. And so we're going to help encourage each other and remind each other to have marshmallow feet in the hallways. Once we've lined up, this is when we go on a quick tour of our school. So I take my students out in the hallway, we walk by the bathrooms, we walk by the library, we walk by the cafeteria, we walk by where each of their specials will be, and then we come back into our classroom. This is wonderful for practicing those marshmallow feet and marshmallow voices in the hallway. It's wonderful for introducing your students who are new to the school building to where everything is. And it's also a good opportunity for them to stretch their legs because we've been doing a lot of sitting. And so I know it's good to get them up and moving. Then when we get back into our classroom, they're going to each make an individual poster to remind them that we're going to walk like marshmallows when we are in our hallways. So each student gets this page, and then they get to cut and color and then glue on the accessories of their choice to their marshmallow friend. And then when they finish their marshmallow papers, I hang them above their lockers. It's a first project that we have hanging above our lockers. And it's a great opportunity to subtly reinforce the 3 main points of marshmallow walking. And then it's just fun for them to see their own work immediately in our classroom on that first day of school. And so this is a great activity to do to help them to create a little poster that's a reminder of my expectations for our hallway walking. So once they've colored and cut out and glued their accessories to complete their poster, then I talk about my expectations for recess, because in our school, our students immediately leave lunch and go to recess. So we talk about how we're going to do marshmallow walking in our hallways until they are outside. We're going to talk about what they do with their lunchbox. And we have to reinforce, even on that first day, that they do not get to climb on slides, and students go down the slides one person at a time. And then I tell my students, already from the time that I've spent with them, I know that they are such leaders and that they can show everyone in our school what it means to be someone who does the right thing and shows kindness. And so I tell them, like, we are going to be leaders for good and show kindness when we are outside at recess. Then our lunch is 11:25. So after we've talked about our recess procedures, then I have my students, I call them one by one in that ABC order that I want, and then we go to lunch. When my students get back from lunch, we're going to go over their lockers again. And so I talk about how they need to make sure their backpack and extra supplies go inside of their lockers, and that their lunchbox goes above their locker after their lunch. That way they can bring it home with them and they'll know right where it is. And then I talk about how right now it's really hot outside, but as we get further in the school year, they'll start to bring jackets and sweaters to school, and those hang on the hooks on the front of our locker. Once we've gone over that, then I read this silly story called Even Monsters Go to School to my students. And after we read this story, then we play a game called Get to Know You Monster. Each student gets this page that has a furry monster on it, and then it has 5 different spots for students to write their answers. And then I have them get a pencil and markers out from their desk. So for Getting to Know You Monster, for each slide, they're going to answer the would you rather question and then write their answer in the numbered box. And they're going to draw on their monster the feature that matches their answer. And so, for example, on the first question, if their answer is go to a park, they're going to write park in the answer number 1 box and then draw 3 eyes on their monster, because that is a feature that matches the answer, the park. So I show them, would you rather go to a zoo, a park, or a lake? So they're going to write their answer in box number 1, and if their answer is a zoo, they put 1 eye on their monster. If their answer is a park, they put 3 eyes. If their answer is a lake, they put 2 eyes. Once everybody is ready, we move on. We ask the next would you rather question, and this time it's changing the feature of the mouth of their monster. Then we do that for their hair and the feet, and then for how they color the main part of their monster. And then once they've completed that, then I let them color the rest of their monster however they would like. And this is a really silly activity, but my students love it. I have done this activity when I had back to school that was virtual, and then I've also done it when it was a back to school in person. And either way, I have had students rave about how fun it was, and I've gotten feedback from parents that this was like one of the first things that their student wanted to tell them about when they got home. So it's really fun for me to do year after year. And you might not be surprised to see this slide again, but I keep reinforcing that callback throughout our first day of school. Then I introduce my students to an activity where they're going to work in small groups, and we do something called a team building puzzle. Each student gets a controller and then puzzle pieces. And I don't show them this answer key until they've worked really hard on theirs, but after they work together, which is a really great opportunity to see how students take turns, see which students step in and are natural leaders, which students are a little shyer and let others go ahead. I learn a lot about students even in this really fun activity because I'm watching and listening to their reactions and their actions. And this really helps kind of gauge some of the personalities of the students that I have. And then once they worked really hard on their puzzles, I reveal a possible solution on the smart board. And my students really enjoy having a chance to kind of collaborate with their peers playing that game. Then we read a letter from your teacher on the first day of school. And in this story, it talks about things that you might want to tell your teacher. And so I give them a piece of paper and I have them tell me things. And so the first question that I ask them is, how would they like to be greeted at my door? Do they want to give me a high five or a hug or a fist bump? And then I want them to tell me something that they like to do and something about their family, something they did this summer. And so they go through this paper, and once they're finished, then we read a story called If I Built a School. And this is a really fun story all about a boy imagining his dream school. What would be what would the gym be like? What would the food be like? What would be in his classroom? And he just lets his imagination run wild. And so then after we read the story, I asked my students who want to share, if you built a school, what would be things you would want in your dream school? And a lot of times students will respond about things that they've already heard in the story. And so things that the main character wanted, they'll say they wanted, which is totally great. But I'll also have students that are really imaginative and they'll think of things that weren't even mentioned. And so then I give them a design a classroom page, and I created design it products, which has different design challenges for students. And most of these design challenges are connected to a read aloud book. And so this design challenge is a classroom, and their job is to dream up what would they want in their dream classroom. And it's really fun to see students add details to their classroom and then call me over and want to share with me why they added the different features of their dream classroom. So it's a really great activity. And what's fun about it is it also is one that kind of takes a little bit more time, but they can do very independently. And that helps me kind of check our time and see what we have coming next. And then that's really gotten us to nearly the end of our day. We have the very last special in our school. And so we've done all of our activities, and I have students start packing up. So we talk about our dismissal procedure. I talk to the students about their green folder and how this is their take-home folder. So it goes home with them every day, and then it comes back to school every morning, and how the papers inside of your green folder you should show your guardian every day so they can see what you're doing and what you're learning. And sometimes those papers are things that your guardian needs to sign. So it's really important that they have a habit of bringing it home and showing their guardian, and then putting it back in their backpack and bringing it back the next day. So we make sure that all of our students have their water bottle if they brought one, their lunchbox, green folder, their backpack. And then we see what special we have for that day. And then when I pick them up from specials, I have created a dismissal page. And as you can see right now, it says insert text here. But as I get my class list and I know how my students get home after parents have responded to my transportation survey at Meet the Teacher Night, I fill out this paper so I can see who are bus riders and what bus number they go home on, who are car riders, if they're a walker or a biker, and if they fall into another category, I put them in other. But it really helps me to visually see where everyone is going and to get them into the groups that they belong in. And it also helps the students to see where they go, because it's a reassuring thing for them to know exactly where to be. Because that first day of school, our priorities are to create strong and meaningful connections with our students, to make a fun day for our students, to teach procedures, but most importantly, we want to make sure that they get home safely and to the proper place. And so this is a very helpful resource that I have to make sure that my students have gotten home with the right person in the right way, as safely as absolutely possible. So then I tell my students, like, thank you for making today so wonderful. I remind them again how delighted I am to be their teacher. And then we have dismissals, and that's our first day of school. Some years we don't get to all those activities. Some years I have extra things ready just in case we go through it all and we need even more things to do. But those have been some hallmark activities that I've done in my classroom year after year, and they've really been such a fun way of connecting with my students and making that first day of school meaningful and exciting. Okay, so now that you've seen my plans for Thursday, let's talk about what I'm doing on Friday. When students walk into my classroom, they're going to see a slide very similar to yesterday. It will show that they need to put their backpack away, find their desk, and today they'll be coloring their picture dictionary as their morning work. Then, once all of my students are present, I will play the music that I taught them yesterday. That is our morning meeting music. And before I play it, I'll remind them that I'm about to play the music. That's our morning meeting music. And I'll remind them that when they hear that music, they need to put their picture dictionary away. They need to push in their chair and then quietly come to the carpet in a circle. Then I play the music and students come. I remind my students that when we are listening at the carpet or listening at our desk, we want to show a good self-check. And we talk about the parts of the self-check again. And then I review with my students our classroom callback. And today they're going to see this slide less because I want to see if they can know it from memory because we've practiced it so many times yesterday. Then we're going to have the same greeting because I need to keep having practice saying my students' names. And it's, again, a really good greeting for helping to build students' confidence because they get to proudly say their name and I enthusiastically greet them. Today's question, I'm going to ask them what their favorite food is, and we go around the circle answering this question. And today we'll play an activity called 12. And with 12, students stand up in our circle, and I let one student choose a number, and then we count off that number. So if they choose 5, then the first student will say 1, the second student will say 2, 3, 4, and then the person that said 5 will sit down, and they're out of the game. And then the person next to them who's still standing will choose another number. And then if they say 10, then we'll count off 10. And then the person who says 10, they'll sit down. So we keep playing this game until there's only one person left standing. And it's just a silly game, but my students really enjoy it and they get excited to see if they get to be the person to choose the number. And it's a fun way to help students get involved in our classroom, and there's a lot of laughter as we play 12. Then after our activity, we have another morning message. I read it to my students and then they read it back to me. In this Friday, I'm going to introduce my students to our Funny Fridays. And that is where every Friday we get to read a joke on my smartboard. And I have a product called Joke of the Day. And this is a great opportunity for students to be able to have something to look forward to on Fridays. And so for our joke of the day for this Friday, we're going to have the question, do you know how bees get to school? And then the answer is on the school bus. And then the other joke is, what's the difference between a teacher and a train? And the answer is, a teacher says, spit out your gum, and the train says, choo choo. This one usually gets a pretty big laugh. This next slide is something specific to the school that I teach in. We are a Great Expectations school, which is something that is a series of commitments and expectations that the school has for the teachers and then that we have for our students. And this is across grade level. So from pre-K to 5th grade, students are hearing some of the same vocabulary and concepts, and it's all about promoting kindness and promoting character in our students. And so something that we're required to teach is a magic triad. And with that, it's talking about the importance of smiles, soft touches, and kind words. And so with each of these principles, I have a different book that we read and a different activity that we create together. So to reinforce kind words, I give each of my students a heart. And on the heart, it says, before you speak, think and be smart. It's hard to fix a wrinkled heart. And once my students have cut out their hearts, they're going to come to the carpet, and I'm going to tell my students that we're going to read the story Chrysanthemum. And in Chrysanthemum, they're going to hear some unkind words. And every time we hear an unkind word, they are to put a little wrinkle in their heart. And then I tell them that if they hear a kind word, that they can then flatten out a wrinkle in their heart. And so if they hear an unkind word, they put a wrinkle in their heart. But if they hear a kind word, then they flatten out their heart. And I say that as we listen, let's think about why it's so important to think and be smart before we say our words, and why it's so hard to fix a wrinkled heart. And so as I read the story, I often have to prompt my students and say, oh, was that an unkind word? Okay, let's put a wrinkle in our heart. And then as I read a little further, if we hear another unkind word, I'll say, oh, was that an unkind word? And we put another wrinkle in our heart. And so eventually their hearts are all balled up. They're just all completely wrinkled. But then as we hear unkind words, we try to flatten them out. And I tell them, I say, when we try to flatten out our hearts after all those unkind words, did some of the wrinkles come out? And they'll say, yeah, some of them did. And I said, but can you still kind of see that the heart is wrinkled? And they'll say, yes. And I said, that's why we want to be so careful with our words, because unkind words can stay with us for a long time. And so even when we hear kind words, sometimes those unkind words can stay with us. And so we want to make sure that we are second graders who are always thinking before we speak and making sure the words that we say are ones that show kindness and respect to our friends, because it's really hard to take back and to fix when we've hurt someone with our unkind words. So this is a really effective visual for second graders to see the implications of unkind words. And so this activity has been one that I repeat year after year, because I think it really helps for my students to see that the effects of unkind words can be long lasting. And so once we've unfurled our hearts, and then I staple each one of their hearts onto a bulletin board in my classroom to remind us to show kindness with our words. Then we read the story, We're All Wonders. And once we finish the story, during the story, they're thinking about how you can look at others through the eyes of kindness. And when we finish the story, we talk about what that means to see someone through the eyes of kindness. And we talk about, with our magic triad, how important it is to have our words show kindness, but also that our smile, like our facial expressions, can show others kindness as well. And so we all make little circles, and they get to make their own smiley face, and we put that on the board to talk about how when we look at others, we want to look at them with kindness, and we also want to show kindness with our expressions. And then, because we read 2 stories, I want to have students to have a chance to get up and moving, because they can get kind of wiggly at this point. So we play a Find Someone Who game. Each student will get a piece of paper, and they'll write their name and then their initials. And we have to talk about what an initial is. And then I read each of the boxes. And so one of the boxes says, find someone who has a summer birthday. Find someone who loves pizza. And I tell them that when it's time for them to go, they'll walk around and they'll ask a friend if this is true for them. So like, do you have a pet cat? And then I'll tell them, if you don't have a pet cat, how you could respond. You could say, no, I don't have a pet cat, but I do love math. I can sign your square that says loves math. So we do this Find Someone Who activity, and it's really fun to see students make those connections and see that even if they have classmates in this class who weren't in their first grade classrooms, they have a lot of friends, both old and new, who have hobbies and interests similar to their own. And so this is a fun activity for students to start to see how similar their classmates are to them. Then we read the story, Have You Filled a Bucket Today? And once we finish this story, then we do a sort, and we read different sentences and decide if that's an example of bucket filling or bucket dipping. And we talk about how we want to fill the buckets of our classmates, of teachers in this school. We want to make sure that we are making an impact that is for good in the lives of others. Then we talk about soft touches and how we do not use our hands to push or to shove our friends. That is not showing kindness. And so we each take our hand, and they'll trace out their hand on a piece of paper and then cut it out. And then I put that also on the bulletin board that has the hearts and the smiley faces to remind us that we only use our hands to show kindness. And often the kindest thing that we can do is to keep our hands by our side to make sure that we're not accidentally pushing someone, because we want to make sure that we are always being a friend that is kind. And then we're going to work some more on coloring our picture dictionaries. and then it is time for lunch. After lunch, we read a story called Wordy Birdie, and this is all about a bird that loves to talk and has a hard time listening to her friends. And this gets her into a little trouble, but luckily her friends help save the day. And after we've listened to this story, Wordy Birdie, I tell my students that it is so important to be a good listener. And when we don't listen, we often miss really important things. And like Wordy Birdie showed us, when we don't listen, sometimes it can get us into a lot of trouble. And so we want to make sure that we're listening to our teachers and following directions. And so I tell my students, we're going to have a chance to practice being good listeners. So each of my students gets a paper that has different objects on the page, and it looks like a coloring page, but I tell my students, don't color your page. You're going to have to listen to my directions. And then I have a teacher copy of all the things that I want my students to do to that page. And so I'll have specific colors or specific ways of coloring each of the objects. And there's 10 different directions. And when we finished, then I show my students what their page should have looked like if they followed all of my steps, and then they score themselves. So they check to see if they got all 10 of those steps correctly. And this is a really fun activity for me as a teacher to see how well my students are listening, but it's also a great way to reinforce that skill of listening carefully and closely and not just assuming they know what to do. So this is the answer key, and they check their page against my own. And it's really fun to see students excitedly tell me like, Miss Mac, I got all of them correct. I listened really well. And it's a great thing to reinforce in my students that they're good listeners. Then, because it's the afternoon, I want my students to have an opportunity to do something that's really interactive with their peers. And so we do something called a candy chat. And with a candy chat, I have a version that works great with Skittles and a version that works really good with M&Ms. But if you don't want to use candy at all, I also have a version that you play with dice. And so that way you're doing the same activity of having students get to know each other by answering questions, but food doesn't have to be involved. But with my students, I do often use candy. And so each of my students gets their own bag of Skittles, one of the mini bags. And what will happen is they get a piece of paper that has the questions on it. And they also have a highlighter. And so I'll tell them, if you pull out a yellow Skittle, you need to choose a question that's in the yellow Skittle column. And we talk about rows and columns. And so, for example, if a student had a yellow Skittle, they could ask their partner, have you ever played in the rain, or have you flown on an airplane? Once they've asked the question and listened well to their partner's answer, then they can highlight that question on their page. So they know that they've already asked the question and gotten the answer. And then the partner gets to pull out a Skittle, and then whatever color it is, they look to see what question they could ask their partner. So if they got a red Skittle, they could ask their partner, do you like playing board games? And once they've heard their answer, then they can highlight that question. And it's really sweet to see students work together to ask and answer questions. And I tell them you can eat your Skittle after you've asked a question, and you can only eat one at a time. And this helps the students know the directions for this activity. And so this has been a big hit year after year, mostly because kids always love candy, but also because they enjoy asking the questions and finding out the answers that their partner gave them. Then we read a story called Straw, and I think Straw is a really precious story. And as I listen to the story, I have my students think about ways that rushing through life can hurt others and yourself. And once we finish this story, which is about a straw that is very impatient to finish every drink that he's put inside of, and one day he is inside of a cold drink and he gets a brain freeze. And he has to learn that actually life is not a race, it's not a competition, but it's actually better if you slow down and savor each moment. And I think this is such an important lesson for my students to learn because it's very easy for them to want to be the first one finished, but not always think about how being the first doesn't always mean that you've done your best work. And so I say in our class, we are not about being first. We want to make sure we're always doing our best work. And I have them practice this concept by coloring a page that has the characters that are inspired by straw on it. And last year, it was so much fun to see my students really slow down and do their very best work. I saw some wonderful coloring on their coloring pages. And so it's a great way to reference back this story the rest of the year. I'll say, oh, we don't want to be a speedy straw. We want to slow down and savor life and do our very best work. So when you're able to pull the lessons from picture books into your classroom routines, I think it's really memorable for students. And it's also fun for them to correlate character traits and lessons learned from characters in picture books. So that is our straw activity. And then on Friday, I talk about how soon we're going to have read to self time. And I walk through my expectations for their book boxes, talk about what goes inside of them. And we also talk about finding a just right book and what that means. And I tell my students that Fridays are extra special because we do two things on Fridays that we don't do the rest of the week. One of the things we do is something called Friday Journal. And in their Friday Journal, each week, the students get to write to a family member, and then the family member is to write a letter back to them. And I send home a note as well as an email to parents explaining what the Friday Journal is and how they're to respond to their students' journal entries. And then we read a story called Dear Mr. Blueberry. And this is a story about a little boy writing back and forth letters. And it's a great way for my students to see how when one person asks a question, then in the next letter, that question is answered, and then they ask a question. So it's helping my students see what a journal could look like with a family member, where they're going to tell them about their week in second grade, and then they can respond back with answering their questions and then asking a new question. So we don't do a Friday journal those first 2 days of school, but I get them excited about what it will look like when next Friday we have our very first Friday journal entry. And then I tell my students that when we have Read to Self on Friday, we are going to have Flashlight Fridays, where we turn off our overhead lights and we just have flashlights and my lamps on as we read our books. And I tell my students we are going to have our first Flashlight Friday next week, and they are so excited about that. And then on the Friday of our first week of school, I give each of my students their Getting to Know You bag with a note stapled onto it explaining what goes inside to their parents. And I also have on that note when the bag needs to be returned by. And so I tell my students, do you remember how yesterday Miss Matt got to share about herself and you learned more things about me? Well, starting next week, you are going to get to start to share to our class more about yourself. And we cannot wait to hear more about who you are and what you love. And then it is time for dismissals. We go through our dismissal routine and procedures. And before I send my students to specials, I show my students all of the books that we have read this week. And so I have my digital bookshelves and I put all of the books that we've read the first 2 days of school. And it is a lot of books, but I find that students are really eager to listen and to sit those first 2 days because they're very shy because everything is new for them. And so it's a good time to introduce them to a lot of really great authors and a lot of really great picture books. And what's fun for my students is I'll find them in the next couple of weeks reading these books out of our classroom library because they enjoyed hearing me read them so much. And so I tell my students that readers are leaders. And look how much we've already read together. And this year, we're going to keep growing as strong readers, and we're going to expand our world through books. And that's a great visual for them to see how much we've already learned and done this week. Then they'll go to their specials for that day. And then when they pick them up from specials, I will have my dismissal slide on our screen to remind me and my students where each of my students go. And with my back to school transportation packet from Meet the Teacher Night, I have parents put how the child is getting home on the first day of school and then how they're going to get home the rest of the year. And you will be surprised how many parents have a different way of picking up their child on the first day of school than on the rest of the school days. And so this slide may look different from Thursday because parents may want to pick up their child on that first day of school, but they may end up being a bus rider or going home with a different adult on the second day of school. So it's really important that you have that transportation information ahead of time so you can know exactly where students go and if it's changed from the previous day. Thank you so much for watching my first 2 days of school planning video. I hope you found some ideas that you can use in your own classrooms. If you're interested in my back to school product or my daily and weekly slides, my morning meeting slides, or my joke of the day slides, I will have everything linked down below in the product description. Know that you are the perfect teacher to teach the students that are about to walk through your classroom door. You don't need to be like the teachers you see on the internet or the teachers you see down the hallway, because there is something unique in the way that you teach that your students so desperately need. I hope that you have an incredible school year and can show up and be your very best self. I'm rooting for you, I'm with you, and I am so inspired by this teaching community that I am surrounded by. Have an amazing day, an amazing school year. Thanks for watching. Bye. Eyes are open, I don't wanna miss these ordinary days.